Okay, so I am talking about the intersection between community planning, neurodiversity, and how good urban practices can make more inclusive communities for everybody. So first I want to introduce the term neurodiversity. Everyone in here is diverse, whether it be through our physical attributes, but also our brains as well. So we all have different brains. And you can't see that, but it processes information in ways that are different. Whether it's the sensory information, our communication with one another, but that can come across as autism, dyslexia, ADHD, dyspraxia, all these labels that we put on what is overall neurodiversity. This is important because it changes the way people interact with the world and socially with one another. It can change measured intelligence, social interaction, whether you love people or would rather stay away, communication, how verbal you are, or maybe how to prefer to be on your own, behaviors, sensory information, whether lights, sounds, vibrations affect you, whether you're overwhelmed by sensory information or if you can't get enough. That's important because there are 14,000 Nova Scotians who are autistic, who have brains that process information in different ways. And if we want to truly build inclusive communities, that means focusing on people with both visible and invisible disabilities. And sometimes invisible disabilities, because they're hard to see, don't always get considered when it comes to the planned environment and the way we build our communities. This is particularly challenging with car-centric communities. Halifax is very reliant on cars, and that's tricky, especially with people who have disabilities who are maybe far more reliant on transit and live in suburbs to actually access their community just through transportation alone. But if you also consider the sensory impact of living in car-centric communities, that's really challenging. If you look at the sounds and noises and smells from traffic and congestion, that can be very overwhelming if you are actually heightened to those senses anyway, and then you have to navigate downtown Halifax by walking or biking or taking the bus. That can be very overwhelming. So what we need to do, if you look at the Cogswell Interchange District, for example, we need to integrate best practices for urban planning because they actually align with the same things that we are advocating for as part of the neurodiverse community. So I can't go through all of these best practices. There's a lot of content here and not that much time, but I'll go through a couple that really stand out to me for what we should be advocating for in building communities. The first one is improving the human experience. Quality public spaces protect from sensory overload. This map here of the Cogswell district, there's a lot of traffic, a lot of wind coming off the ocean. There's a lot of loud noises and smells that can be unpleasant. Well, we need to mitigate those by actually incorporating urban planning best practices. If we look at having protected walkways, places to have trees for shading, seating so people are comfortable, looking at protecting people from strong winds coming off the ocean, sitting in the sun in the wintertime, having pleasant smellscapes, and even just areas that have, human scale lighting instead of car scale lighting. That can make a tremendous difference in how you are feeling in that environment. Here's an example of a microclimate that is really well designed for human comfort. You have alleys where you can sit outside without worrying about traffic. You have areas that have shade, soft edges, temporary shading for if it's really bright and sunny or maybe it's raining. All this is a very comfortable environment for everybody, but especially people who are neurodiverse or are autistic. We also need to consider our social spaces and providing quiet areas or semi-private areas for people to back away from social situations and, calm down, relax, right? Take a breath, and then re-enter what is maybe a very difficult social situation. I have a colleague of mine that went to the Buskers Festival a few years ago and hasn't been back since because she was so overwhelmed by the crowds on the waterfront. And she actually locked herself in a portable washroom for 2 hours before she felt comfortable to come back out again. Well, this past summer, she was in Montreal and she found a parkade where she could actually go up top and view a festival from up above in a very calm, semi-private area that wasn't overwhelming. But that right there, that's not accessible, and that's really a shame. And that's really important when we consider the transit hub that we're developing here on Barrington Street and redeveloping Scotia Square. This is going to be essential for people who are neurodiverse because of an over-reliance on transit. Not over-reliance, but a more increased usage of transit. But we have not a whole lot of consideration for semi-private zones in a transit hub for what is otherwise a very stimulating experience. We have bus lanes, we have traffic, we have lights, that's all overwhelming. We have some designs here to protect from the elements, which is fantastic, but we need to have those quiet areas as well and areas for relax and recouping ourselves after a transit journey or making a connection. The other really important thing here is to consider our wayfinding and the way in which we're communicating information to people who are navigating our streets. Some people might have difficulty with reading and writing and actually having written communication coming across effectively. That's why we need to have visual cues, either painted crosswalks or tactile cues, so you can actually feel that, oh yeah, this is a crosswalk, this is where I belong. That all provides information. Same thing with bike lanes and painted sidewalks to say, here, this is where traffic belongs. This is for people. And actually having physical separation between traffic and people is essential for accessibility as well. All of this is important, big breath, because we need to get the right mix. We have spent so much time focusing on cars, but cars aren't accessible for everybody. And that means that we don't have enough attention to transit. Streetscapes, pop-up, play, civic spaces, parks, places where people can feel comfortable to live and thrive in their community. And we need to rethink what we traditionally view as play as well. Sometimes play is an afterthought when we put it into community design. But all these things, those hammocks on the waterfront, that's a sensory experience, rocking back and forth. That can be very calming and soothing for somebody who's seeking that experience. Same thing with light fixtures and water features. Those can be very accessible and very soothing. Or having swings at a bus stop so you can rock back and forth while waiting for your ride. Those are accessible. And I think we need to start thinking of accessibility not just as an afterthought or something to add to a space, but from the very core of what we're building and designing in our communities. And this is a really exciting time here in Nova Scotia because of our Accessibility 2030 legislation that's coming out. We have a tremendous opportunity to build urban planning best practices along with accessibility to build these spaces. And we've done tremendous work already when it comes to physical accommodations and physical accessibility. And I'm really excited to see where we take this further to incorporate neurodiversity and invisible accessibility as well, so we can all thrive in our communities.